This video provides real-world perspectives on the use and benefits of the popular Project Definition Rating Index tool. You will hear from 4 industry experts representing oil, gas, and infrastructure projects. A future vision for PDRI is also provided. This video is sponsored by the Construction Industry Institute's Upstream, Midstream, and Mining sector.
My name is Danny Daoust. I'm the manager of capital projects, project services, and for ConocoPhillips. And we are a upstream producer. Our market has shifted somewhat. We're becoming predominantly a unconventional producer, and we still do mega projects periodically. We always have maybe 1 or 2 mega projects going on at any one time. And then in the smaller projects, the unconventional, we would have hundreds of projects going on at any one time. Imagine most producers run through periods of extreme activity and periods of maybe lesser activity. During a period of peak activity, we encountered some issues on several projects. And when we did the lessons learned and got the feedback, we believed the issue was around maybe a lack of understanding of the definition of the project during its stage gate process. So the team maybe thought they were further ahead, or the organization interpreted that the team was further ahead. We made various decisions, went into execution, and then when we saw the results didn't meet what the expectations were. Did some research, and as I said, we believe it was around the maturity, the identification, the understanding of the maturity of the design or of the project development at the various stage gates. So we looked at the CII research in the PDRI and believed that we could adopt it to our organization to better reflect the maturity of the design, the maturity of the project development at the various stage gates. So that's what we did. And this started approximately 6 or 7 years ago. And of course, we took the research raw, did a couple of tests, found that maybe some of the questions needed to be tweaked to our industry, to our company. So we produced what we now refer to as our FEL scorecard. And the scorecard is it very closely matches the PDRI for major projects, I would say, or for the oil and gas industry, with a couple of tweaks, as I said, to make it more ConocoPhillips specific. As we had the original industrial PDRI, and we have now, over the years, expanded it to have both what we would refer to as an onshore version and an offshore version, because some of the questions, the design parameters, the risk modeling is slightly different for offshore versus onshore work. I think when we initially launched it, the process was really viewed as a corporate requirement. To some extent, maybe even a tick-the-box exercise that the project team felt they had to do to appease corporate. Of course, that was not the strategy when we launched it. It was really for the team to challenge themselves on the maturity of their progression and where they felt there may still be gaps. And it also forced the team, particularly the various disciplines, to discuss amongst themselves through a facilitator openly and honestly about where they felt their development was. And over time now, I think that has been adopted. I think the project teams see that as a tool for them, no longer a tool for corporate. The score itself is really irrelevant. We don't look at it as a pass or fail. We look at it as an evaluation of the areas of low definition. Therefore, the areas that may be at risk or the areas that the project team need to focus on in the next stage. We use this tool regularly on all projects that we consider major projects. So a major project for us is TIC over 150 million, which is not very big. Most of the projects we do are over 150 million. And that's what we use our standard onshore FEL scorecard for, or the offshore. We'd add the offshore version if it was offshore as well. But we are evaluating the PDRI for small capital projects, which is sort of tied in with the infrastructure. And we're looking at that for our smaller projects. If we can get the workshop down to several hours. Right now, our workshops can take upwards of a day and a half to 2 days to really challenge the team, and it requires on these larger projects quite a few participants to make sure that we're getting a diverse opinion, and we're also covering all of the disciplines. Whereas on the smaller projects, it's probably more like 2 or 3 individuals, maybe a facilitator to challenge certain areas. I believe if somebody is implementing it for the first time, if you do a true workshop scenario where you have the team involved and it's not an us and them, you're really working through the development of the project, you're really evaluating your status and not trying to hit a predetermined objective. It's a lot of work. It opens up a lot of discussion, but when you're through it, you realize that that's exactly what the team needs.
Derek Wedel. I'm an operating principal with Global Infrastructure Partners, a private equity firm that invests in various infrastructure businesses. So as an operating principal for Global Infrastructure Partners, my role is to introduce new tools and new best practices to many of our portfolio companies to help improve project performance, which includes performance from a cost perspective, from a schedule perspective, as well as from a quality and safety perspective. So we utilize the PDRI as one of those tools to improve project performance on the front end of a project, which leads to better performance during construction and commissioning activities. We've utilized PDRI on multiple infrastructure projects, ranging from midstream related projects, cross-country related pipelines, renewables, power generation, ports and airports and railroads. So that's kind of what our focus is from an infrastructure perspective. And all these businesses are located globally. We have some in North America, South America, in Australia, and Europe, and in Asia as well. So we've rolled out the PDRI across on a global scale. And the projects range in size anywhere from, say, $50,000 to maybe $100,000 per project, all the way up to, we've seen PDRIs used for projects as much as $500 million to $1 billion for a given project. The typical advice that we'll give each one of the portfolio companies on how to implement PDRI is, we'll start off by saying, at a minimum, you should look at PDRI at least one time during the project. So prior to execution, kind of during that detailed kind of design phase, right? So right before you go into execution and construction on the project and major engineering work, you should at least do the PDRI once. However, for larger projects and for small projects, once is enough, right? For small capital projects, or even some moderate capital projects, once is enough to be able to assess the risks and to assess the project. For large projects or for more mega-sized projects, we would encourage probably twice. So certainly right there before construction, but also kind of backing up from there, kind of during that, probably, kind of that preliminary engineering phase, conducting it at that point. Once the projects become kind of really real, is conducting the PDRI at that phase. And during the preliminary phase that it's not defined. There's a lot of uncertainty about the project from a scope perspective. You still have to kind of work to understand, my right-of-way risk, environmental risk, design risk, and things like that. So there's going to be some blanks, there's going to be some unknowns that you have to address. So our guidance that we give, portfolio companies are at least once. For large projects, twice. I don't know of many of our businesses that utilize it more than twice. Usually twice is enough, but we think of it kind of in once to maybe 2 times, depending on the size of the project. So when I think about the PDRI, I think of it first kind of as a checklist as a risk mitigation checklist. Just as importantly as it is to mitigate the risk, I also think of it as an alignment tool. So what I find, what's really, really interesting when you come out of a PDRI workshop, if the team wasn't aligned when they entered into the workshop, they sure are when they, they sure are when they leave that workshop. So when you have an integrated team coming in to address all of the questions in the PDRI workshop, they are hearing, maybe sometimes for the first time, other members of the project team and their views or perspectives or concerns on the project. And so what we find is when you walk into the workshop, you're mitigating risk, you're identifying risk, and you're going through it in a checklist format, but you're also getting good team alignment. So I find it as a good alignment tool as well. Those projects where we are conducting a PDRI kind of during the conceptual phase, it helps the business to really think about whether or not we should pursue the project much further, given the risk profile on the project. Maybe there are new risks that came up that really don't make the project economically feasible anymore. So we need to, either back up or rethink the project altogether. I think it certainly impacts the design and execution of the project. So as we get kind of later in the project and we're thinking about how are we going to design this, how do we procure, how do we construct, how do we commission and turn it over to to our operations group, it certainly has the ability to impact that aspect as well. So I've been a part of multiple PDRIs, and I think the single most impactful factor by a mile is going to be having the integrated team in place and in the room. I think if you only have a few functions to represent the project in a PDRI, you're missing out on a lot of insight and ability and insight on particular gaps and risks and on scope and schedule and budget, et cetera, et cetera. You're also missing out on the alignment of the team as well. So the best PDRIs that I have been a part of include the integrated team. It includes members from the project team, the project manager, controls, engineering, construction, operations, and maintenance. It includes people from commercial. It includes people from environmental and safety and land and right-of-way. It also includes a sponsor. It has to include the sponsor. And there are other members of the business as well that need to be included as well. We're not talking about a workshop of 40 or 50 people, but we're talking about delegates or representatives that know the project, that are assigned to the project, and that can represent their functions. The integrated team is the most important and impactful aspect of the PDRI that I would say you need to have in place. I think probably the second most impactful factor is having a really good facilitator. So someone that's unbiased, independent from the project. It's got to be independent from the project. Someone that knows the tool, that knows the technology and the lingo, and also knows how to facilitate as well. So having a really good facilitator that can kind of probe and push in the right ways to kind of tease out information and understand the project and ensure that there's good understanding of what the gaps are and risks are is really important as well. For us, we found the PDRI to be just a really invaluable tool, to incorporate as part of the front-end planning project process. What we found is that ultimately it helps the project team to get aligned around the project scope and the objectives of the project. It also helps the project team to understand what are the outstanding gaps and how well defined is the project. And it gives the project manager, ultimately, I think it's the project manager's best friend. Because for the project manager, they have a list of issues that they can go back and they can address going forward. It is a point in time on the project where the PM can visit with his or her team and say, do you understand the project? How well do you understand the project? How well is the project defined? And where are my risks? Where are my gaps? What do I need to address before I really spend a lot of the project funds and time moving the scope and the project forward? So, and I think it also gives the leadership team, the company leadership team and the executive committees, an opportunity to kind of look and say, okay, how do I know that my project is ready to go to the field or ready to go and move on to kind of a notice to proceed, if you will? How do I know it's ready? And so I think the PDRI is a great tool to be able to give them the sense that, hey, the project is well defined, or hey, maybe we need to pause, we need to kind of recycle it for a few weeks and address some of the issues. So it's a great tool for the executive team to be able to measure as well. We find it really indispensable. We encourage each one of our portfolio companies to adopt it as well and to use it as part of their project process, whether they use it for large projects or for small projects or for all projects. We find it something that, frankly, that generally most project teams really enjoy. And I think once they've kind of gone through those first couple of PDRIs, they think, you know what, this was really, really helpful. We've got the team together. We've identified what the gaps and the risks are. We have a list we can go after, we can attack, and this is, really going to help our project going forward.
I'm Cory Scarborough. I am the projects leader for Occidental, and I work in our Permian EOR business unit. Our group is a functional branch of the business unit that supports a lot of our capital and maintenance development programs. Definitely upstream. We work pretty close to the wellhead. In fact, a lot of our projects are, development projects where we're drilling wells. And so, obviously any surface facilities related to the gathering of the fluid, the separation of the fluid and the sale of the fluid is in our scope. We do get what I call midstream. We do have some gas plants. We do have some compressor stations and some, facilities that we kind of call midstream in our world. So we do get into a little bit of gas processing. We use both the small industrial and the kind of small infrastructure. We found that depending on the project type, one might fit better than the other. For instance, like a pipeline project may not need all the inputs on the industrial template. We have recently began rolling out the version 5, that incorporates the maturity aspect. That's something that I'm excited to see us kind of incorporate some of the new aspects of the tool that's been developed. Definitely in our project workflow now. We've made some strides in the last few years that we've really mapped out our project workflow for not just the larger projects, but even some of the smaller ones where we tend to have the biggest misses just because we kind of what we call fast track them. And, we think we know what we want, but we don't really know what we want yet. And so we've established it in the workflow. If we're disciplined as a company and as a group, we follow it and we see that benefit. At a leadership level, it carries a lot of weight, so there's a lot of power in that number. And like you said, kind of justifying, what the project team is asking for. So definitely has helped there. I think just from the project side, it's also, kind of going through the steps and the checklist. I mean, it is a good, a tool to, it's a honesty check to make sure to see where you are on the project, to make sure you're, either not overly optimistic or overly pessimistic. So I think within the project world, it's more of a functional tool with helping us, establish, a contingency rate, but, at a broader scale, it carries a tremendous amount of value with leadership to kind of, instill that confidence that the project is ready to kick off and that whatever they're asking for is exactly what they're going to achieve. I think the biggest takeaway for me is, it really, it's nothing to be scared of. It's not difficult. Maybe the first time you do it, you're kind of trying to find your way, but, it is useful. It's, even if it's just you by yourself. And, but I think as you get bigger, more complex projects, definitely getting a good balanced team to conduct the PDRI is really important. You definitely have to have those, people in there with the personalities that are willing to challenge, especially the project team. The other thing as a kind of a functional kind of projects group, one thing that I find that it's important to do is we need to trust it. We need to trust the scoring. We need to, the worst thing that we can do is, if we go through all this exercise and effort and it suggests, let's say, a contingency amount of, 11 or 12%, if we go back and just throw 15 or 20 on top of it anyway, then I think we're kind of doing it a disservice. And so we're kind of taking away the credibility of the tool. And so I think eventually leadership will pick up on that. And, so I think it's important, especially as we get more and more information with our benchmarking efforts, that we really need to trust the tool I think that's probably the three biggest takeaways that I have with my experience with the tool.
Yeah, so my name is Julian Raisin. I'm head of the project management office at Gatwick Airport Limited in London in the UK. And I'm part of the senior leadership team within the construction part of our business. And in a normal year, we'd be investing about £250 million in the development and growth of the airport. So we've been using PDRI at Gatwick now for since about the end of 2015. And really, we were recommended to use it by one of our shareholders, actually. And we found it really beneficial to our projects. We use the buildings version of the PDRI, which we've actually slightly adapted to put a bit more airport-specific content into there, some questions that really relate to some of the experiences that we've had on previous projects at the airport, pick up some issues that maybe stop our projects from being successful sometimes. So yes, it's a slightly adapted form of the buildings PDRI, and we tend to use the short form of the PDRI as well. So for our larger projects, we'll use the full buildings PDRI, and for the majority of our projects, we'll use the shorter form version. We use the PDRI mainly, I think, as a communication tool between the project sponsor and the project team, and also some of the other project stakeholders. That's probably its most useful purpose to us, because it means that it gives an opportunity to flush out any potential issues early before we commit funds to a project. The other benefit and the other use that we have of PDRI is through the benchmarking approach. So the scores that we get from the PDRI, we can see some trends over time of how different projects score, and that allows us to take action and either stop or recycle projects if their scores are too high. We certainly use the outcome or the output of the PDRI to inform the risk register and make sure that we've captured all of the necessary sort of aspects of risk in the risk register. I've certainly facilitated PDRI reviews where the PDRI questions will flag up an issue, or will lead to a discussion that flags up an issue that maybe we haven't properly thought about, and then that will get identified in the risk register and worked through. So yeah, it's pretty well integrated in that respect. The two most important things for me in terms of getting a successful PDRI outcome is firstly having the meeting face to face if you can. Certainly in these times, I guess a lot of project teams will be working remotely and through Zoom and so on. But in our experience, the most effective PDRI meetings are held face to face. I think secondly, getting the right breadth of contributor to the PDRI is very, very important. I've certainly facilitated PDRIs where we've had people from the operations team, people from the project team in the same room, and the project team might have thought that they've covered off all of the aspects of the planning of a particular project, and you can see from the body language of the operations guys that they're not quite thinking the same thing. And that quite often, very quickly, leads to a discussion where a particular issue will get raised and resolved. Whereas if you've just been carrying on without a PDRI, you wouldn't necessarily have found some of those issues. So as I said before, we've been using PDRI since 2015, and we did a piece of work to look at the number of change orders on our projects compared to the PDRI score on projects over that time. And what we found was that the number of change orders reduced by from about 1.6 change orders per project down to about 1 change order per project over that period of time. So there was quite a significant impact in terms of the correlation between reduction in change and the PDRI score. One of the opportunities to improve PDRI is to, and I know there are companies out in the market who have tried doing this, is to hold all the data in a single database. So the way that the PDRI spreadsheet works is that each project will have its own PDRI set of scores, and it sits independently in its own spreadsheet. I think one of the ways it could be improved in the future would be to say whether an organisation could store all its PDRI data in a single database, and therefore you could pull out a bit more easily some information on trends and typical weak spots for projects. So if a project is, if a particular organisation always suffers from poor external stakeholder management on projects, for example, or week schedules or something like that, you might be able to spot those trends through PDRI scores and do something about it more easily. Whereas at the moment, you can't really do that because the PDRI spreadsheets are all separate for every project.
I've been in the construction industry all my life. I started as a cost engineer, then moved into working with major EPCs, ultimately became project controls manager. About, it was 20 years ago, I then transitioned into a software company, which was then Primavera, now subsequently acquired by Oracle, to help them think about industry within a software organization. The vision that CII have for PDRI was obviously to transition it from a great methodology and the models they produced, but ultimately they, having spoken to them more recently when we became more engaged from an Oracle perspective, their vision was always to take it from that project at a time basis, which is obviously what Excel models are very good at supporting, to a more enterprise scalable approach, so that you could then do proper data mining across PDRIs within your organization to understand where there was issues with maybe a department, or why certain PDRIs at certain points in time were not scoring well. That ability to elevate it from just a one-off project at a time approach in an Excel model was really their vision. It's about connecting the dots really now. So we have these great benchmarking tools, but if we think about PDRI, it naturally pumps out risks, which naturally then fit into the project risk tool. So it's about how those tools now should be joined together, because there is value in bringing that into one basket, and how information flows between those different tools. And that's where ultimately I saw the vision of why Oracle needed to play much closer in this space. We often get asked, what is good practice? It's pointless Oracle saying what good practice is. It's like, why don't they actually go to the if you like, the horse's mouth of what good practice is, which is CII. CII is, it's the gold standard in construction methodologies, benchmarking, and best practice. So that's what we now push across the Oracle organization, the part of the Oracle organization we're in. Is like, if somebody asks what good is CII best practice. It's not us making something up. And that really drove us more to actually working and starting this relationship, and actually then thinking about how we can actually transform some of what is currently Excel models or methodologies and actually turn them into, scalable enterprise solutions.
Here are some key takeaways from this video. PDRI is an invaluable front-end planning tool that assesses the project's level of definition or maturity for any project, regardless of type or size. In fact, there are several PDRI versions covering different project types, such as industrial, building, and infrastructure, both for large and small projects. Several benefits have been identified using this tool, including improved cost and schedule predictability and transparency, better alignment of the project team, a clearer understanding of the gaps and risks before moving forward with the project, improved communication between the sponsor, team, and other stakeholders, an honesty check showing that the project's estimated cost and duration are not overly optimistic or pessimistic. Best results come from having an effective PDRI workshop, where the single most important factor is having the integrated team in the room, and the second is having a good facilitator who is independent from the project, unbiased, and knows the tool. PDRI continues to evolve into an even more powerful tool with its latest PDRI Matters version, and Oracle's future vision of creating a more enterprise and scalable approach by storing data in a single database. This will make it easier to share PDRI data with other relevant tools, such as risk management. This enhancement can help CII's benchmarking effort in collecting additional high-quality project data. In conclusion, PDRI is a useful front-end planning tool that is easy to use and can be trusted, as it was developed by CII, considered to be the gold standard in construction methodologies and best practices. To learn more about PDRI, go to Best Practices in the CII website.